Excellent!
What's up everybody, Big Swede here once again. Thanks for joining me. So, something I've been toying with for quite a while is the idea of building my own custom PC for here in the studio, for doing my video editing and photo editing, music recording, stuff like that. And I've been dealing with this store-bought PC here for a while, but the problem you run into with buying something off a shelf is generally they're going to be geared towards one of two people. Neither of those two people are me. The first one, you're going to get geared towards, your average user who's, surfing the internet, checking their email, typing up a Word document, just doing basic stuff that doesn't require a lot of processing power or memory. And that kind of system is really underpowered for what I'm doing. So, video rendering takes forever. Even just editing, when you're playing back in your timeline, the video is very choppy and it makes it hard to edit. So, that kind of system isn't very good for what I do. On the other end of the spectrum, you have like the ultra gaming PCs that are expensive. And quite honestly, they're overkill for what I do. Most of them have like high-end graphics cards in them, which, interestingly enough, for video editing, your video graphics card isn't as important as the CPU and the RAM is. So, you can cut back in those areas and, put that money into the processor, which is kind of why I wanted to build this system myself, and that way I could put the components in it that suit what I'm doing. So like I said, I can cut back, I can cut cost on the graphics card and put that into CPU and memory that's going to make the system run faster and do what I need it to do better. So that's what we have here today, the start of a new project. You guys know me, I've got my geek stuff going on, and I like my Star Wars and my superheroes and stuff like that. So I wanted to give this project a cool name, and you'll see where I'm coming from as this project goes along. You can see a little bit of it there, but today marks the start of Project Sith Lord. Let's get in it. Alright, so I am still waiting on some parts for this build. So what we're going to concentrate on today, part one, is getting the motherboard put together and mounted into the case. So we have all the components we need to do that. Starting here with the motherboard itself. We have the MSI X470 Gaming Pro Carbon. This motherboard is actually a little bit of overkill for what I'm doing. I originally was going to go with this board's little brother, the B450. But it was out of stock. I didn't know when it was getting back in stock, and I didn't feel like waiting anymore. I wanted to get this project rolling, so I spent a little bit of extra money, upgraded the board to the X470 here. Not a big deal, not a huge cost involved with upgrading this. And if I ever want to do some gaming in the future, I'm well equipped to do that with this board. Moving on to the processor, we are going to be running a AMD Ryzen 7 2700X with this. This is an 8-core, 16-thread processor, so lots of good processing power for the video editing side of things. Video editing loves multi-core, multi-thread processing, so really good processor here for that. For the RAM, we went with the G-Skill Trident Z RGB DDR4 RAM running at 3200 megahertz. We have 16 gig of RAM here. Eventually that's going to be 32 gig, but for the sake of getting this project rolling, I just went with 16 for now. Easy to pop in some RAM DIMMs in the future to get that up to the 32 I want. And then for our internal storage, for our operating system and programs, we went with this Samsung 970 EVO Plus NVMe M.2 SSD drive. It's been a while since I've built a PC myself. It's been many years, probably about 10 years since I built a PC myself. When I built that last one, I built with a physical, hard disk drive like everybody did. And you can still buy those, they still work. But doing the research for this project, I was amazed at how far technology had come. This drive right here is a 500 gigabyte drive, and it's about that big. And it plugs directly into the motherboard. There's no cables. No moving parts, so you don't hear the hard drive spinning up or any of that. And it's very, very fast. Read-write speeds are really, really fast because it's, right in the motherboard, right in the circuitry of the board there. Really, really cool stuff. I found a lot of really cool stuff researching this project. So once we get it all together, we're going to slap it into the NZXT H500 case right here. It's got this nice tempered glass side so you can see all the components once it's in there. You can see a little bit of that Sith Lord theme in there, but I promise you once we get this thing together and you guys see it coming together, it's really, really going to show, and I can't wait to see what it looks like. So let's start building this thing. Alright, so we've got everything we need to do the build here. We have our CPU and the cooler here. We have our RAM, and we have our NVMe drive here. And the nice thing about computers nowadays is pretty much all you need to put them together is a Phillips screwdriver. There's not a whole lot of tools involved, so let's get this motherboard unboxed and get rolling. Alright, now inside of your motherboard box you're going to have a lot of different cables and stuff. Since we're doing this NVMe drive, one of the important things here is this little screw right here. That's going to be the screw that you use to tighten down your NVMe drive, so get that set aside. This stuff not as important until we start plugging everything in and getting going, so we'll throw that back in the box for now. Another important piece right here is the I/O shield. Before you mount the board into your case, you need to make sure you put your I/O shield in, otherwise you'll end up having to take your motherboard back out once you realize this isn't in there. So again, something important to set aside. Now, one tip I found when you're putting your motherboard together is just set it on top of your box here. Ideally, you want to have ESD mats grounded and everything, but not everybody has that. Not everybody wants to go spend the money on that. So just make sure that you have it on a nice platform here. Try and ground yourself. Make sure you don't have any static electricity that you're going to damage any components. Alright, so taking a closer look at the motherboard as far as what we're going to be dealing with today. Right here in the middle here we have our CPU socket. That's where our CPU is going to sit, and then our cooler is going to mount over the top of that. Over here to the right we have our DIMM slots, which is where our RAM DIMMs are going to plug in. And then right here, where underneath this little shield here, is where our NVMe drive is going to sit. Now this does have this included heat shield with a screw in it, so that screw I showed you earlier, we're not going to need that. This particular motherboard does have a second slot for a second M.2 drive, so if you were going to use a second one, then you would use that included screw to tighten that one down. But since this one has the included one on the heatsink, we'll just use that. One thing you're going to want to remember when handling your CPU, this CPU has very fragile, very delicate pins on it. You don't want to bend those. Try not to touch them at all, honestly. One thing you're going to notice when you go to install this, when you're trying to orient it in the correct way, you'll notice on one of the corners of the CPU, you're going to notice a little gold triangle. And that's going to correspond on the CPU socket itself. There's going to be a little, it's hard to see, you got to look for it, but there's a little triangle on there as well. And you're just going to line this triangle up with that triangle, and then you'll know it's oriented properly. Alright, now for installing the CPU here, all we're going to do is lift up this little bar. And as I said, there's no pressure involved in dropping this in here. You're basically going to set it down, orient it properly with those triangles, and then lower that bar down. You don't need to push it down into the motherboard or anything like that. So we'll just take her, set it down there, and then we lower our bar down and lock it. And our CPU is installed. Always a good idea when you're installing these to have your motherboard book handy so you can reference this and figure out where things are supposed to plug in, where they go. Always good to have this nearby. All right, next up we're going to be installing the stock cooler. for the Ryzen 7 2700X. And honestly, for a stock cooler, this thing is really, really good. I'm going to run with this for a while, and then somewhere down the road, I'll probably upgrade to a liquid cooler. We'll do some overclocking, stuff like that. But for now, this thing is going to do just fine. So as I said, you kind of want to reference your manual here and figure out where your fan cable is going to plug in. Looking at it, I know mine's going to plug in right here. So you want to figure out how you want to orient this thing so you're, for cable management purposes. So looking mine over, I'm going to run it this way, and we'll just run this cable around the outside here. This does come pre-installed with thermal paste on the cooler, so nothing else you need to do other than get her on there. So this particular cooler has these little brackets here that are going to latch onto the motherboard on either side. So we'll just set her down here, get it latched on one side. These little brackets are kind of a pain in the butt to get on there sometimes. Get this back one on. Okay, there's that one. Now on the other side, unfortunately you can't see, there's another one of these brackets and a little lever. So once you get it on there, okay, it is now on. Then we just got to flip this lever over to lock it down in place. Alright, and it is now in and on there solid. Then it's just a matter of taking our cable here and plugging it into the fan header on the board. And our CPU and CPU cooler are now installed. Alright, next up we'll be installing the RAM. Now as you can see, we have two DIMMs here and we have 4 slots. So which ones do you install them in? And again, that's where your motherboard manual is going to help you out here. So it's going to give you different configurations if you only have one. If you only have one RAM DIMM, or if you have 2, or if you have all 4, that's going to tell you which ones to use. So in this case, we have 2, so we're going to use DIMM A2 and B2, which is going to be your 2nd and 4th slot. So we'll open up the little knobs here for those, and then we'll take our RAM DIMMs here, and as you notice, there's a little slot in here, so it can only go in one way. You can't install it backwards. Just line that up, and then you're going to press down and they'll lock in. Alright, simple as that. Next up, we're going to be installing our M.2 NVMe drive, and that's going to go underneath this shield right here. So we'll take our screwdriver and loosen that up. Take our shield off here, and now this shield does have some thermal pad underneath, so you want to take this film off of here, and then you're going to take your drive, you're going to insert it here, have it at an angle, push it in there, and take our cover, put it back on. And put our screw back in. Now you'll notice in the shield here there are several different holes. That is because M.2 drives come in different lengths, so depending on what length you buy, you might need to use a different hole. So in looking everything over before I throw it in the case, I realized that I forgot to connect a cable for the cooler here. The fan cable is hardwired in, but this cooler does have RGB lighting in it, and if you want to take advantage of that, you have to hook up this cable to one of your RGB headers on the motherboard itself. So looking over mine, there is one right here behind the cooler, so we're going to connect the cable from there to the cooler. All right, this will get cleaned up with some cable management once we get everything set in there. But for now, we'll just kind of tuck it away back here. And we'll get this thing ready to put in the case. All right, so we got our case here ready to go, but there's a couple things we need to do before we get to putting the motherboard in. So first of all, we're going to take our glass cover off of here. So we just loosen up the thumb screw here, and this pops out, and we'll set this aside for now. Next up, since we're going to be working on both sides of the case here, we're going to want to take the other side of the case off as well. So again, loosen up your thumb screws here, and that will come out. Now inside of here, you're going to have a box with some screws. Very important. This is how you're going to attach your motherboard to the case. So it's going to come with a variety of different hardware. So we'll pull that out. And now would also be a good time to install that I/O cover for your motherboard. That's going to go right in here in this slot, and it's just going to prevent any kind of dust and dirt from getting inside of the case. So that's just going to come right in here, and it's basically just going to snap into place. You just got to kind of push and lock it in. So these corners are a little bit of a pain in the butt to get in there, but a good push will get it in there, locked into place. There we go. All right, now our I/O shield is installed, and both sides of the case are off, and now we can start worrying about getting everything installed. One thing you want to know, if you have a case that will work with different size motherboards, you need to make sure that your standoffs are installed in the right spots. This particular case right here works for ATX motherboards, micro ATX motherboards, and ITX motherboards. And they have different patterns for where the screws go, so you need to make sure that your studs are installed in the right spot. In this case, they came pre-installed in the correct spots from NZXT, but always check that just to make sure. Now the easiest way to do this is going to be to lay the case down on its side, and then you're going to drop your motherboard into it and secure everything down with the screws. Alright, so we're ready to drop our motherboard into the case here. So basically what we're going to want to do is angle it down and get the I/O lined up with the I/O shield here. Get it lined up with all the studs, and then start putting our screws on. Alright, so we're ready to drop our motherboard in, but in kind of fitting this up first, I noticed that I was having trouble getting the motherboard to slide in with this rear cooling fan sitting where it was, so we're just going to kind of slide this out of the way for now, and then we'll reinstall it once the motherboard is in. So we'll just set it there for now. Take our motherboard, slide it down into place, and then line up our studs. And there we go. All right, now that the motherboard is in place, we're going to take our bag of goodies we got with the case. We're going to have some zip ties and a bunch of different screws in here. And looking at the manual, the screws I'm looking for here are these right here, these 6x32 flat screws. And there are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 screws that hold this thing down. Alright, now that we got that tightened down, we'll get this fan back in its correct spot. Hopefully we can get the wires past the board here. Alright, so this is pretty much going to finish up part 1 of the Sith Lord build. We've got the motherboard all installed and installed into the case. Part 2 is going to be installing the graphics card and the power supply once I get that, doing all the cabling, cable management. And then part 3 is probably going to be installing Windows and getting everything running and firing it up for the first time. So if you guys are interested in any of this stuff, please stick around. We will have more stuff coming up here in the near future with the Sith Lord build. So hope you guys enjoyed. As always, if you like what I'm doing, give me that thumbs up. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button up there. Stay up to date with any new videos we got coming out. We will catch you next time. Till then, live life and have fun out there.
Excellent!